by reading an article out of another book here to kind of review some things that we've covered so far in our teaching here on creation. This particular book is the McClintock-Strong's Encyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and Ecclesiastical Literature. It's been around for 100 years now, just to show you how good it is, what it's like, and how long it's been around. And they've got a rather lengthy, this is a set of encyclopedias, if you don't know what it is. There are other ones similar to this that are quite good to have because they're theological encyclopedias rather than, you know, what you'd have your World Book Encyclopedia or something like that. And they've got a rather lengthy article on geology. I think I counted more than 30 columns, and this is tiny print. And they've given more than 30 columns to geography. Now, like I said, the two writers, McClintock and Strong, most of you don't know McClintock. He died soon after they started this work, and Strong was left to do the rest of the work. But you know him from your Strong's Concordance. That's the same fellow there, James Strong, Dr. James Strong. So he's the one that wrote this, 17 million words in this group of writings here. Now, I don't know who wrote the article on geology. I'd never get to the end of it if I tried to find the end of the article. But once they've explained several things about the Mosaic account of creation, then this is getting towards the middle of the article. I was just reading this the other day, and I found it to be rather interesting in light of what we've studied so far on the different views of creation as opposed to what a strictly literal view of the Bible gives us. And he tells us towards the middle of this article, I'm just going to sum up the principal hypotheses concerning creation. Now here's some of the hypotheses, and see if you don't recognize some of these. Now remember, this is more than 100 years ago, well over 100 years ago. And as I go through some of these, see if you can't already in your mind refute these based on what you know concerning what the Word of God says. Now some of them are ones that don't really say a lot, that aren't around today, and I'm going to skip over them. But I think he's got about a dozen here, and I'll just read a few of these. So here he says, the following are the principal hypotheses. This is concerning the origin of all things in creation. Number one, that the days of creation are indefinite periods during which all the phenomena of geology occurred, and that the deluge is now marked by the drift and gravel remains of the post-tertiary age. Number two, I guess especially these first two are very interesting, besides this last one that we're going to get to. The first sentence of Genesis has no connection with the subsequent verses. Now remember how they fight over, is that the first act of creation, or does that stand as just a summary statement of everything? And here he says it's got no connection with the following verses, because where it talks about the creation of the heavens and the earth there, we go on, we're going to be getting to the heavens and the earth again tonight on the second day of creation. And that throws people off right away when it appears like you've got the creation of two heavens at two different times and two earths at two different times. So he says the first sentence of Genesis has no connection with the subsequent verses. The phenomena of geology may be placed between the first and second verses of Genesis 1. The chaos was universal and ushered in the present creation. And he gives as the proponent of that Dr. Thomas Chalmers, 1804. So there's the gap theory back there. Here's another view. We cannot rely on the interpretation of the Hebrew records, and therefore we may set them aside when apparently at variance with geological facts. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to make about the Word of God. Here's another one that we've just briefly mentioned. The records of Genesis 1 and following are poetical representations and not historical. Here's another one, that the first verse is a detached account of the original creation. Well, that's similar to the second one that he gave. The chaos, the 6 days of creation, and the flood were local phenomena and refer to what was transacted in the province occupied by man only. Oh, no, that's a little different. What he's saying there is that all creation is found in the first verse, except the garden. And that would be found in the following verses there. He said just the province that occupied man, which would be the garden and the Edenic region. This was another one. I didn't know that this was that long ago. This is number 8 that he gives. That the Mosaic narrative is a revelation made in visions to the mind of the prophet. The days are therefore spoken of not in connection with the events, but the duration of the vision. Remember that. That it took God a whole day to say the first 5 verses to Moses. Then here's the 9th view, that all creation took place consecutively according to the literal reading of Genesis 1, which is what we believe, but he's got that stuck near the end. And then he goes on here, his 11th view, and says, we have reserved until last as being, on the whole, the most comprehensive and the most satisfactory. And these are the conclusions of a Mr. Crofton. Now, I've never heard of him before. So here are his conclusions about creation, and this is Strong and McClintock, who are good and conservative. So evidently they're agreeing with this, since whoever wrote the article here. Now, you've got just hundreds of contributors that contribute to this, but your McClintock and Strong would be the editors, and they would have to read, and I know Strong did this, read and reread all of these articles in here to weed out anything that they didn't want in there, since the publishers selected them, McClintock and Strong, to be the editors. First of all, he said, the absolute age of our earth is not defined in the sacred volume. We can grant that. He says there has been a long interval in duration between the creation of the heaven and earth mentioned in the first verse of the first chapter of Genesis and the continuation of the earth's history in the second verse. So that's gap theory, a long duration between verse 1, verse 2. That the state of the earth described in the second verse as without form and void does not necessarily mean matter never reduced to form and order, but may signify matter reduced to disorder after previous organization and arrangement, which would be gap theory summed up again. That the commencement of the account of the first 6 days of creation dates from the beginning of the 3rd verse, and God said, let there be light. That's the traditional view, that the first thing God made was light. And this is what he's saying. The 6 days creation begins with verse 3, let there be light. Another point, that the calling of the light day and the darkness night, which is what we looked at last time now in verse 5 of Genesis 1, with the declaration that the evening and the morning were the first day, does not necessarily imply that this was the first day, absolutely speaking. Well, then what does it imply? If it says this is the first day, and he said, now that doesn't imply that it really means that it's the first day, then I don't know what that implies. Number 9 here, that the work of the second day mentioned in the 6th, 7th, and 8th verses may have been only an operation performed upon the atmosphere of our earth. I don't know what he means by that. That the work, we mentioned this one before, I think, that the work of the 4th day, which is the day of the luminaries, described from the 14th to the 18th verses of Genesis 1, does not necessarily imply that the sun, moon, and stars were then first created or formed for the first time from pre-existent matter, but may only have been that they were then for the first time in the detail of the history of the present earth made visible to it and ordained to their offices with respect to the coming human creation. In other words, the sun, the moon, the stars have existed, but they've not been visible upon the earth. And now they take a word and try to make it, rather than let there be, and then God made these, let there appear, and then there appeared, rather than creation here, creatio ex nihilo. Rather than that, it's let there appear. The sun, the moon, the stars, and so forth, because they were there all along, but they simply hadn't appeared to man on earth. Well, I guess that's about all there. But that's rather interesting. In the most recent article of Christianity Today, if you're on If you get that journal, you will have noticed that the last one said that on the front cover it said CT, Christianity Today, rejoins the origins debate. And, of course, that's the leading evangelical magazine here in this country. And what do? They go right through there and say, well, now the word yom sometimes can mean a figurative period. And he gives you the day of the Lord and everything like that, just like we went over here before. And evidently they're holding to some form, some view of the day-age theory, that those days should not be considered as literal days. It just all boils down to this is a sign of the times, that people are so confused over such a simple treatise as Genesis 1. It's something that all Christians ought to know from Sunday school, but something that all of them still seem to be having so many problems with. So it's a sign of the times where you've got conservative evangelical Christians adopting something like the day-age theory, which, as we've shown you, has to be read into the text here, because on a simple, literal reading of Genesis 1, you never come up with something like that. Well, Genesis 1 in verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens, plural, and the earth. Now, as far as the earth was concerned, it was unformed and unfilled, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit, capital S, of God moved upon the face of the waters. And so, of course, according to one of their views, here's where God begins creation. And I guess if you really haven't studied all this out, it is confusing. It was confusing to me whenever I first read Genesis 1. So we're not criticizing people when they're confused over it, but before they state their views, they ought to become less confused over it so they won't confuse us whenever they state their views. It's always smart, if you're going to be ignorant, just keep silent about it. You won't do anybody any damage. If you're ignorant, just keep your mouth closed. Where is that? Over in the book of Proverbs, the last few verses of Proverbs 17. It says that even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted to be a wise man. And he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. Why? Because you don't know what he's like. He's never said anything before. So since he stays so quiet, you just assume, boy, he really must be smart. Or she really must know what's going on. So that's, I wish more people would take heed to that. But you see, most people that speak and put their messages on cassettes and write and put their material in books are opening their mouths and letting us know what they don't know. They don't let us know what they know. They let us know what they don't know. So if you're going to be ignorant, it's not a good thing to be ignorant. The Bible says it's not good that the soul be without knowledge. But if you're going to be, then just be quiet. That way you won't harm any of us. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now remember, the King James have put in a capital D and a capital N. It makes no difference one way or the other. God called the light day, the darkness he called night, and the evening was, and the morning was, day one. Now we left off with that verse. Let's go over to Psalm 74, where the psalmist, we're just going to read one verse over here. Psalm 74, verse 16. Now remember, this was a specific, located, but temporary light that God makes in verse 3 that's going to last until the fourth day, or at least its shining upon the earth is going to last until the fourth day, until it's replaced by the sun, then the reflection of the sun off the moon, and the stars, which produce and generate their own light. The basic reason for that being, as we said last week, God knew ahead of time the universal proclivity of man, that as soon as he fell, he would begin to worship the sun, since the sun causes plants to grow and the animals have to have plants to live, then man has to have animals and plants to live. In other words, everything is directed back to the sun, and therefore God knew that man would worship the sun in the end, and practically everyone has. Now, as soon as someone says, oh, we don't worship the sun here in America, I'll just say, why don't you check out what industries that make things like copper tone are doing today? Come on now. Oh, we don't worship the sun here in America. You would be floored and flabbergasted over the amount of money that's spent on things like copper tone. Of all things. Of all the things that you could buy. And the most ironic thing about that is America is the most racial country on the earth. I'm talking about the white people in America that want to criticize the blacks because of their color. And what do they spend millions and millions of dollars on every year? Trying to get just as black as they can get. And they don't think any deeper than the color of their skin. They don't really think any deeper. So, you better believe that we worship the sun here in this country. You better believe we do. We might not bow down before it, but people just lay down and prostrate before the sun. And I worship thou, old sun, and old rays of the sun. And they build their whole life. Some people are like this. I've met them. They build their whole life around cloudy days and sunny days. And they can just hardly wait till the sunny days come. Now, I don't know if it's that way up here in Minnesota. I assume that it is. But I know it's that way down south. And I had a high school teacher that told us one time, I never forgot this story, that whenever winter came, and we don't really have much of a winter in Mississippi, but it's too cold to lay out in January, but they had a built-in swimming pool. And you know what they do? Drain the pool, get down in the pool during the summertime, or during the wintertime, and the sun would reflect the rays, the walls would reflect the rays of the sun all, give them a tan during the wintertime. But they'd stay low enough to stay below, the cool air and the breeze there. And I imagine if you got down in a swimming pool like that, when it's not that cold outside anyway, it could get pretty warm down in there because you'd be holding all that heat there. Don't people get tans up here too? You can get it on a pretty day if you just go out snow skiing. That's one of the best ways to get a tan. Because I know whenever we were skiing in Colorado, and it was rather warm, like maybe 30 degrees there, and people wore short pants, no shirts on, no nothing but short pants, skiing. And they stayed like that all day long. And it's because out there on that snow, those rays reflected on you, and you can get burned in a hurry. And some of them were. And it was cold. We had to bundle up there. But they were out there with short pants on, skiing. You'd think they'd go to Florida, but they go to Colorado in the wintertime to get a suntan. That shows you how much we worship the sun in this country. Well, enough against the copper tone industry. Verse 16, the day is thine, and we just saw this in verse 5. He made day and night. The day is thine, and the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Now you see the light there is going to refer back to the light in Genesis 1:3 because he said, thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Because Asaph, this is a psalm of Asaph, knew well enough that there had existed a light before the sun. That is, verse 3 comes before verse 14 in Genesis 1. Now one other thing I wanted to give before we go on to the second day concerns the relative motion of the earth. We're guided around here, I guess, by the desire to get dark as we can and to go as fast as we can. And teenagers are always wanting to build cars that'll go faster and faster and faster. And if you've got one like that wants to go faster and faster, just tell him after you see this how fast he's going right now while you're sitting there. Now this is a little diagram to show you what I'm going to be saying here. 4 points about the relative motion of the earth. Now evidently when the earth is first made, it's already rotating on its axis because we have the division between day and night here. Now evidently, of course, it's not started revolving around anything because we don't have the sun to revolve around, but it could sit still and rotate and still go through a period of 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness all at the same time. Okay, this big circle around the outside, we're going to say represents the universe. Now this is just a horrible map because there's no way, if this was the universe, the dots of the earth would have to be so small none of us could see it, even with the microscope. Then we've got the green circle here, which is inside this outer circle, represents our galaxy. And then I haven't drawn a circle because I didn't want to get too many of them on here and confuse you. But we'd have another circle here in our galaxy, which would be our solar system. You break it down from universe to galaxy to solar system. And then in our solar system, we're going to pretend that this ball in the center here is the sun, and this sphere here is the earth. All right, let me give you some facts about the motion, the relative motion and speed of the earth. And this is as it pertains to us today, because as I said, some of this wouldn't have been true back then. A lot of things have changed since the beginning of creation and since the flood. But as it stands today, the earth rotates on its own axis 1,000 miles an hour. Now that means while we're sitting right here, we are traveling 1,000 miles an hour. There was a show on not too long ago where this, and he was a Christian, or professed to be a Christian of all things, was going to try to make history by breaking the sound barrier here on earth, which he did. Of course, they've done that in the sky, but to be able to go faster than the speed of sound, and he did that in a car. Of course, it was propelled by some jet engine or something out in the flats of Arizona or something. He went over 700 miles an hour just in a car right here on the earth. It was a whole program about him, and he was a Christian. Someone asked him there, he said that people say, aren't you taking a risk? And don't you think that's unchristian to take a risk like that? And he gives the old weak excuse, well, if you even walk outside your doors today, you're taking a risk that an airplane or something won't fall on your head. So he used that as an excuse to take any risk that he can, which is unscriptural. We'll cover this more in ethics, but there are certain things, and some people don't even realize this, and it's not a question of whether you've got faith or not. It's a question of whether you are ethical in the demands that God places on you as a human being, where he says, take care of your body. That's over in 1 Corinthians 3, 1 Corinthians 6. He said, 1 Corinthians 6, 19 to 20, he said, what? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which you have of God, which is in you, and ye are not your own. You're bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body as well as in your spirit. All we need is a little understanding of things like that to rule out sports like football and hockey, where you take a risk of being hurt seriously in things like that. And the Bible says, take care of your body. So that's beside the point whether a person's got any faith or not. The faith message, it's the message that holds everything together in the Bible, but the Bible says, take care of your body. So here we've got the earth, first of all, spinning on its axis 1,000 miles an hour. The best way to see this, and some of us who have telescopes can demonstrate this to you, you focus a telescope, which I did the night before last, on the moon and look away for 30 seconds, the moon's already gone after that. Now, the moon hasn't gone anywhere, but the earth has turned. Now, you can't see that as well if you're looking at the moon because, you'd have to stand there an hour for the earth to really turn for it to be over here. And when you're watching something like that, you can't tell as closely. It's like watching the hands on a clock. You know those things are moving, but you sit there and watch it and you'll never see it move. You know where it started and where it ends up, but to actually see that hour hand move, you'll never see that thing move at all. But now if you focus, say, a telescope even on a star, now the moon moves faster or appears to move faster because it's closer to us. But it's remarkable. That's why the big telescopes at universities have little motors that go with them that keep the telescope moving just opposite from the way the earth goes, and therefore it will never move from that one spot. But that's because the earth is going around 1,000 miles an hour. So that's how fast we're spinning now on this globe. Gravity's holding us down on here. The earth would just sling us off into outer space. Gravity holds us down on here, but we're going 1,000 miles an hour. At the same time we're doing that, so we're just going, the earth is just going every which way, but you don't feel like you're fixing to turn over anything, though, do you? Just remarkable. This is why these things, besides, if you didn't see them in the Word, which the Word teaches some of these things in hidden passages, it's no wonder it wasn't discovered until recently. How did you ever figure that out? How can you stand on a globe, something round, and know that it's going to turn, and also know that when it gets upside down, you won't fall off of it then? How are you going to figure that out in your own natural mind? That'd be very difficult to do without the field, the study of astronomy, because then you see other spheres there, and you can begin to make some deductions based on that. But your mind, you know what a sphere looks like. You think, if it turned over on the upside down, I'm going to fall off on the bottom of that thing. And therefore, what does man want to believe? I'm going to believe in a flat earth, because I don't want to get upside down and fall off. And then he doesn't want to go too far, or he'll fall off the edge of that too. So while we're going 1,000 miles an hour, and this is on our axis, we are revolving, that's our rotation, we are revolving around the sun 67,000 miles per hour. So we're rotating on our axis 1,000 miles, we're revolving around the sun 67,000 miles per hour. Now the sun, of course, is the center of our solar system. That would be another circle that would be drawn here. So we're going around it 67,000 miles per hour. At that same time, the sun, and of course it has a gravitational force that holds the 9 planets within their either a circular or elliptical sphere. If they go around the sun by gravity, it holds them there. It is carrying us through this solar system, through our galaxy at 64,000 miles per hour. You have to break this down to understand where we're going at all these different times. So we are rotating here 1,000 miles an hour, then we're going around the sun 67,000 miles per hour. Then while we're going around the sun, you see it's like you would have a circle here that would be turning, and here's the sun, and it's going to be going around the sun, and while it's going around the sun's going to be moving too, because it's going to be going in our galaxy. And then while this is turning, the Earth is turning, while it's going around the sun, while the sun is also pulling it, then this whole green circle, our galaxy, all the galaxies are moving away from each other at tremendous rates of speed, is traveling 21 billion miles through space in 1 year. 21 billion miles. If you ever wanted to go out and travel, spend money and travel as some people do, you're traveling just as much as you can. You're going 21 billion miles a year. All the people that have ever traveled on the earth would never make up just what we travel in 1 year by being inhabitants of this planet called Earth, which God named Earth here, or Eretz, in Genesis 1. So we'll come back to looking at some more considerations of the earth later on. Now that brings us to day 2 of creation. That finishes up the first day of creation. Yes. All right, let's go back to it then. I should have another circle, and maybe that would help you understand it a little better. Let me just draw another circle here. I'll have to draw this one black. It's the only color pen I have out here now. Now you see, what we've got here, first of all, is the known universe, which is the big circle. Now we don't know if it's round or square or what, but we'll just make it round. Everything else seems to be round, so we assume that the universe is probably round, since all the planets are and the galaxies have at least an elliptical shape to them, then we could assume that the universe is going to be round or elliptical also. So we've got, first of all, you've really got 3 divisions here. You've got the universe, then inside the universe, this green circle there are just hundreds and hundreds of millions of galaxies. And again, we'll get to this more down on the 4th day of creation, so I just want to explain it well enough for you to understand it here. Then inside each galaxy, you're going to have these smaller circles, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of these, called solar systems. And that's what we live in, with the sun as the center of our solar system. Now, it's not the center of our galaxy, but it's the center of our solar system. Then around the sun, You've got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, have I left any out? Saturn. You've got the 9 planets, just like the Earth, that are going to be circling around the sun. And this is what the 67, is that what you asked, the 67? Okay, this is what the 67,000 miles per hour would mean, the Earth going around the sun. Now, as I said, this black circle represents our solar system, and our solar system is going to be traveling inside our galaxy. Just let's assume from one side to the other. It's 100,000 light years across, so we'd never go across it anyway. But it's moving inside this galaxy 64,000 miles per hour. And of course, while it's moving inside the galaxy is also moving inside the universe, and all the galaxies are going away from each other. But it doesn't mean the universe gets any bigger, though. The universe stays the same size. But all the galaxies, and of course, we don't know where the universe ends. There's no way we'd ever find that out. Pardon? How many? About as many atoms as there are. There's a lot of them. More than a dozen. Only one universe, but there's hundreds of thousands of galaxies, solar systems, suns, stars, and possibly other planets. Nothing like Earth, but there could be other things like Neptune or Uranus or Pluto or Mercury or Venus or something like that. Besides your other things like your meteoroids and meteors and meteorites, well, those hit the Earth when they're called that. And your interstellar dust and black holes and neutron stars and quasars and things like this. Any more questions on that? Okay, in the second day of creation, we go from, well, we just got 3 verses here, 6, 7, and 8. Verses 6, 7, and 8 is what we'll be looking at here. God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. The evening was, the morning was, day 2. Now our first question that we need to raise here is, what exactly is this thing called the firmament? This is, in other words, this is what verses 6, 7, and 8 are all about. It's what the whole second day of creation is about, this thing that is called the firmament. So our first question is, what is the firmament? And we've got 2 basic views on what the firmament is. First of all, the critical view is that the firmament is the solid vault or dome that's represented in the uneducated Hebrew cosmology. And this is why I say it's the critical view, because this is what the critics say in complaining about the Hebrews and their cosmology. Because, and this, we'll say more about this later also in another teaching, but in the Old Testament, a superficial reading of anything that has to do with the origins of all things, creation, the earth, the heavens, and so forth, give us a rather dim view of Hebrew cosmology when we see that they believed in such things as the 4 corners of the earth, when they believed in such things as this firmament, vault, or dome that represents the heavens, through which you've got sluice gates or floodgates, the Bible calls them. Up above this, you have what Job calls the storehouses of treasure. You've got big boxes up there that store up snow and that store up hail, that store rain, that store sleet and things like this. And whenever, this is the way the Hebrews would think of it according to the critical view now. This is not the way they thought, but this is what the critics say. That whenever God wanted to make it rain, he'd open up a sluice gate in this dome here and pour everything down. And when it got through, he'd close up the sluice gate again. And this is because to the Hebrews, they would look over here. Let's say they would look to the east, and they would look to the west, and you've got what? You've got a big arc. It ends right over there to the east, and it ends right over there to the west. And this big thing up above you is the firmament, and according to the Hebrew, the critical view of Hebrew cosmology, it would be a solid vault or dome. Now, reading from the Jerusalem Bible, which is very unscriptural in most of what they have to say, listen to what they say. I'm going to read you from the Jerusalem Bible of Genesis 1, verse 6. And God said, let there be a vault. So you see right away they hold to the critical view. Let there be a vault in the waters to divide the waters in two. And so it was. And God made the vault, and it divided the waters above the vault from the waters under the vault. And God called the vault heaven. Evening came, morning came, the second day. Now that's also in the New English Bible. I believe the New English Bible also, along with the Jerusalem Bible, gives you the critical interpretation of this word from the Hebrew, and they give you a vault or a dome. Now the reason why we've got some translations that give us this particular meaning for this word is because of what the Septuagint has. And I'll write what the Septuagint word was here for you. Because remember now, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. So they're going to give us a Greek word here for this word firmament. And on the basis of this, we've got the Latin Vulgate, and on the basis of that, we've got things like the New English Bible and the Jerusalem Bible. Stereoma is the Greek word from the Septuagint. And this, traced back to classical Greek, does express a solid structure such as a vault or a dome. Our question is, the question we're asking is, what is this firmament here? The first view, the critical view, is that it's a solid vault or dome of the unenlightened Hebrews. Now, of course, if someone says, well, if this is what the Greek translation of the Bible has, and it actually is something solid, then that must mean that the Jerusalem Bible, and as a result, our King James Bible here, is correct. But you see, the problem with that is that this particular translation of the Hebrew word that's found here, that we'll give you in a moment, represents the 3rd century B.C. Alexandrian cosmology, not the 15th century B.C. Hebrew cosmology. And there's a big difference between that. You see, the Septuagint, translated in the 3rd century B.C. in Alexandria, Egypt, very liberal, very allegorical in their interpretations of Scripture. And it's because of the background of their cosmology that we end up with a word that would represent something solid and something fixed here, as opposed to what Moses said, what God said back here in the very beginning. Now, Jerome, the early church father who translated the Bible into Latin, known as the Vulgate, and of course he took his version here from the Septuagint in Genesis 1 and verse 6, gave us of all things the Latin word firmamentum. F-I-R-M-A-M-E-N-T-U-M. Firmamentum. And as a result, into the King James, we have the word firmament. And it's totally wrong. Because what do you think of when you hear firmament? Well, something firm, something hard, like a vault or like a dome. And the Greeks had this in their translation of the Bible. Then Jerome picked it up in the Vulgate with the firmamentum. Then King James comes right along and gives us an anglicized meaning for that word, or an anglicized form, an English form of firmamentum, and gives us the firmament. And right away when you read that, and of course you say, well, I know what it is. It says that it's heaven here. We know that it's heaven, but what's heaven though? Is it a solid dome or vault, like critics say the Hebrews believe that it was? And because we've got this word firmament, we think of something firm. Now, we know of heaven as being something not firm. You can just pass your hand through. But that's why we should not have this word here. And I'll tell you what it is here in a moment. Now, that's the critical view. The correct scriptural view is that the firmament here is the atmosphere. Now, you see, God is in a process of changing things and preparing things here on the earth. He started off with a watery mass that had no atmosphere. There was no measurable difference in distance between the very top, we could say the very surface, the outermost surface of this liquid, watery mass known as earth, and then the second heaven, or space. There was nothing in between there like we have today, like we're going to have in Genesis 1, 6 to 8. Now we've got something between the very outer surface of the earth, the second heaven or outer space. And what is that thing? It's our atmosphere. That's what comes in between these two things. That's what God is doing in these verses to prepare a suitable habitat or environment for life that's going to come on the very next day. So you see him in an orderly process here, preparing the earth for things and people to live on it. And the first thing he's doing here with it, after he's put light on the earth, which inhabitants would need, is to provide some type of atmosphere for it. And that's what this word means. The way it should be translated is expanse. As a matter of fact, they've given us in your margin there expansion, which is not the best. It should be expanse. We'll come back and change those words in a moment, so you can hold on, and we'll come back and do that. Another version, NASB, Genesis 1:6, and God said, "Let there be an expanse." So this is correct. "In the midst of the waters, let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so, and God called the expanse heaven." There's some versions of the Bible, such as your NASB, will give you a correct translation of this word. And as you see there for Genesis 1:6, they do give us over in the margin that the Hebrew means expansion. But you see, they should have just put that in the text and then put firmament over in the margin, and we could scratch that out then. But they put the wrong word in the text and put at least the form of the right one over into our margin. But it shouldn't be expansion, it should be expanse. This comes from the Hebrew word. It's a noun, rakia, R-A-Q-I-A, which comes from the Hebrew verb reka, R-A-Q-A, which is used 11 times, the verb, used 11 times in the Old Testament. Sometimes it's easier, friends, to find out what a noun means if you go back to its verbal root and find out what the verb means. The BDB, Brown Driver Briggs Lexicon, gives the following meaning for this verb: to spread out, to stamp out, to beat out. It can mean those various things. Then on that basis, you have to look at the context in which we find the word and then determine now which one of these usages of the word best suits the occasion here. Now, if it's something metal, something firm, we would want to stamp out or to beat out. It'd stamp out the vault, beat out the dome. As a matter of fact, over in Exodus 39, I believe, we have the word used here where you would get the idea of something firm from it, because it is used on several occasions with the meaning of something firm behind it. Exodus 39 and verse 3, "And they did beat the gold into thin plates." Now that's the same verb that has the noun that corresponds to it found in Genesis 1 and verse 6. Here it does refer to something firm, and therefore it shouldn't be spread out, it should be beat out. "And they did beat," or beat out, "the gold into thin plates, cut it into wires to work it in the blue, the purple, and so forth." Going back to Genesis 1 and verse 20. We're going to have to change this verse around a whole lot when we get there. All I'm going to do is change part of it for you now, which will be the end of the verse, based on the Hebrew preposition al, A-L, which shows us here that it cannot, this firmament cannot refer to a hard metallic dome or vault. And I want to show you why. Just from this preposition that we have in Genesis 1:20. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." No, that's not what it says. It says, "And fowl that may fly above the earth upon the face of the expanse of heaven." Now notice it says that these birds are to fly, in other words, upon the face of the expanse. Now you can fly upon the face of the expanse if it's just universe, if it's just atmosphere. That means you just fly around in there. But it would have to say that the birds were to fly under or below or beneath the expanse of heaven if this is a solid vault or dome. Do you see that? We know that the birds are going to be flying around, according to this verse, in that area rather than below that area. We know they fly around in the atmosphere, in heaven, that is the first heaven, not below it. And if this firmament back here should be firmament, it should be represent a vault or a metallic dome, then here in Genesis 1:20 it would have to say, let the fowl fly above the earth underneath or below the firmament of heaven. Because you'd have to stay underneath that dome or you'd get in outer space then.
For the continuation of this message, please